The scream didn't sound human. It tore through the thin walls of the decaying house like something desperate, feral, the kind of sound that could only escape a soul cornered by life itself. On that rainy evening, as thunder cracked above the trembling roof, a 14-year-old girl named Leila pressed her back to her bedroom door, arms shaking violently, breath snapping in her throat. Her stepfather's heavy boots thudded down the hallway, each step deliberate, ugly, and filled with the promise of something unspeakable. She didn't fully understand the plan he had whispered earlier, but she knew it was terrifying. Selling her, trading her like an object, handing her over to men she didn't know. And now, as the storm outside grew wilder, she felt the weight of the world crushing her small chest. "Please," she choked to no one, shaking uncontrollably. "Please, someone help me. If you believe kindness and second chances can save lives, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts." The night had begun like any other inside that suffocating place. Leila had long lived under the shadow of a man who filled every room with dread. The moment he entered it, a man named Ron, her stepfather only by title, never by love. The house always smelled of stale alcohol, cigarette smoke, and hopelessness. Leila's mother had died 2 years ago, leaving her with the only guardian the law recognized, though the world inside that house had never felt lawful or safe. Ron saw her not as a daughter, nor even a person, but as a burdensome to be tolerated until he could turn her into something profitable. He had debts, enemies, and a mind eroded by the substances he swallowed to forget his failures. For months he had hinted, threatened, said things that made Leila's skin crawl. But until that night, she hadn't realized how close he was to actually doing it. Earlier that afternoon, she overheard a conversation from behind the kitchen wall. Ron's voice was low and impatient as he hissed into his phone, telling someone to arrive after dark. "She's old enough," he had said. "You come with the cash. I'm done feeding her." The words cut her like shards of glass. She had frozen where she stood, unable to breathe as her entire world tilted sharply off its axis. She knew Ron was cruel. She knew he didn't care. But she never imagined he would do something so monstrous. Now it was nighttime, and the men were close. She heard Ron's voice downstairs, muttering curses, pacing like a predator preparing to claim his prize. The sounds of heavy rain on the tin roof mixed with the crackle of thunder, making the house feel like a cage about to collapse. Her hands shook as she tried to push her desk in front of the door, but she was too small, too tired, too overwhelmed. Tears streaked down her face as she whispered apologies into the air, apologies to her mother, apologies to herself, apologies for being too weak to run earlier. In moments of despair, it is strange what the mind chooses to remember. For Leila, it was the kindness of a group of bikers she had met by accident months ago when she escaped the house for a few minutes of freedom. They were big, loud, leather-clad, and tattooed, but their hearts had been surprisingly soft. They found her sitting alone outside a gas station, crying over a broken phone and a lost sense of direction. Without asking for anything, they bought her a small meal, fixed her phone, and asked if she was all right. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man everyone called Bear, had knelt beside her, offering gentle words in a voice as deep as thunder yet as warm as sunlight. That small act of kindness had seeded a tiny hope in her heart, a hope she was now clinging to like a drowning girl clutching driftwood. She grabbed her repaired phone with trembling fingers. Ron had cut off the Wi-Fi and had taken her charger days ago, but somehow the battery still held a sliver of life. Just 4%, enough for one chance, enough for one message. Her lungs tightened as she typed, hands slick with fear. "Please help me. He's going to sell me tonight. Please." She hit send to the only contact she trusted, Bear. The phone screen flickered, then went black. Downstairs, Ron cursed loudly, calling for her to get your useless self down here. She backed further into the corner of her room, heart hammering as if trying to escape her body. The thunder cracked again, shaking the house. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine the outside world, people laughing. In warm homes, families eating dinner, soft lights glowing behind safe walls. Everything she wished she had, everything that had been stolen from her the moment her mother died. The footsteps grew louder, closer, meaner. Then, suddenly silence. And then the unmistakable distant rumble of engines, not one, not 2 dozens. The earth itself seemed to vibrate with the sound, and it grew louder with every passing second. Ron's voice faltered downstairs. She heard him run to the front window. "What the hell?" He muttered loudly enough that she caught every syllable. The roar intensified, rising like a storm of steel and fury. And then came the headlights, dozens of them cutting through the night like blazing angels descending upon a battlefield. Rain splashed across chrome, leather jackets soaked under the downpour, and engines idled like growling beasts ready to strike. 60 bikers, 60 warriors of the night, 60 men and women who refused to let a child face hell alone. Ron stumbled backward as Bear climbed off his bike, his boots splashing in the mud, his shoulders broad and steady. He wore no fear on his face, only fury sharpened by purpose. The other bikers fanned out behind him, forming a wall of unwavering resolve across the entire front yard. The headlamps lit the trembling front door in a harsh white glow. And then, with a voice that rolled like thunder, Bear growled, "Where's the girl?" The house fell breathlessly. Still, in that moment, for the first time in years, Layla felt something she had forgotten existed. Safety. The kind that arrives like an army, the kind that growls at monsters, the kind that shows up in leather and steel. Ron tried to bluster, but his words came out slurred and weak. "She's my kid," he spat. "This is none of your business." Bear stepped forward until he was inches from the doorway. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. "Try touching her," he said quietly, "and you'll find out how wrong you are." Ron's face paled. He knew these weren't ordinary bikers. These were men who stood together with the kind of loyalty that frightened cowards. These were women who rode through storms without blinking. These were people who wouldn't hesitate to protect someone who needed them. While Ron froze at the doorway, Bear lifted his chin, signaling to one of the bikers, a woman named Vix with red hair braided down her back. She nodded and jogged around the side of the house, disappearing into the shadows. Moments later, she pushed open the back door from the inside, carrying Layla in her arms like she weighed nothing. The moment Layla was in the open air, the bikers exhaled, the tension releasing like a drawn bow, finally letting its arrow fly. Bear stepped toward her, and she collapsed into his chest, sobbing silently, lungs heaving as she clutched fistfuls of his soaked jacket. He wrapped his arms around her with a gentleness so profound it broke every crumbling piece of darkness that had been weighing her down. "You're safe now," he murmured, and for the first time she believed it. The bikers didn't let Ron take a single step toward her. One of them called the authorities. Another recorded everything. They ensured the truth would be undeniable, but the story didn't end with that rescue. It began with it. When sunrise broke the next morning, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and rose, Layla found herself wrapped in a warm blanket inside the bikers' clubhouse. It wasn't the kind of place most people imagined as comforting. There were rough walls covered in old photos, heavy wooden tables scarred with decades of stories, and the lingering smell of engine oil mixed with coffee. But to Layla it was paradise. It felt alive. It felt safe. It felt like a home built from loyalty, not blood. Bear sat beside her, sipping coffee from a battered mug. The room hummed softly with conversations between bikers still buzzing from the night before. Layla watched them, her small fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. She didn't know how to speak, how to thank them, how to breathe in a world that didn't hurt. Bear finally broke the silence. "You did the right thing calling us," he said. "You're family now, kid. Family." A word she hadn't heard in what felt like forever. He explained everything about what would happen next: the police reports, the protective custody, the promise that Ron would never lay a hand on her again. But what struck her the most wasn't the legal process. It was the way everyone in the room treated her with respect, with gentleness, with a fierce protectiveness that made her chest ache with something she'd forgotten existed: hope. Days turned into weeks. The bikers didn't abandon her after the rescue. They took turns staying with her during meetings with social workers, ensuring she never felt alone. Vix braided her hair every morning. A biker named Tank brought her small trinkets from thrift shops, a tiny silver angel, a soft scarf, a notebook with sunflowers on the cover. These weren't grand gifts. They were reminders that someone cared enough to think of her. She began attending therapy arranged by one of Bear's friends. At first, she barely spoke, her voice rough from silence and fear, but slowly she began to uncoil. Like a flower long crushed under frost, she began to stand again, petal by petal. The bikers encouraged her to find her strengths. She discovered she loved drawing, sketching, sunsets, motorcycles, and gentle scenes of safety she had once thought impossible. She filled notebooks with art that slowly transformed from dark and jagged to soft and hopeful. Winter melted into spring, and Layla blossomed further. She joined the bikers on their charity rides events where they delivered food to the homeless, raised money for abused children, and helped struggling families. The roar of engines no longer frightened her. It thrilled her. It reminded her of the night her world changed, the night 60 bikers showed up like angels cloaked in leather. She learned how communities are not always built from blood or official bonds. Sometimes they are formed from people who choose to stand by you, who choose to protect you, who choose to love you when you feel unworthy of love. But healing is not a straight path. There were nights she woke screaming, sweating, terrified of footsteps in the dark. There were days she couldn't speak without trembling, afraid of shadows that reminded her of Ron. But every setback was met with open arms. Every tear was met with patience. Every fear was met with reassurance that she was no longer alone. Bear often sat beside her at the clubhouse table, letting her talk when she needed to, letting her remain silent when words felt too heavy. He became the father figure she never had, the kind who listened, protected, encouraged, and never broke a promise. One warm evening near the end of summer, Lila was invited to stand before the entire group. She wore a new denim jacket that Vix had given her, embroidered with small angel wings on the back. Her hands trembled as she stepped into the center of the circle of bikers. Bear handed her a patched cloth piece, a small emblem shaped like a shield with the biker family's symbol stitched into it. "This," he said with pride, "is the mark of someone who survived hell and rose stronger. Someone who's part of our family, not because she needed saving, but because she belongs." The room erupted with cheers, whistles, and applause. Lila's eyes overflowed, not with pain this time, but with gratitude so deep it shook her. She had entered the year believing she would not survive. Now she stood before people who loved her without conditions, without expectations, people who would ride through storms for her. People who already had years past Lila grew into a confident young woman, strong, compassionate, and courageous. She pursued a career helping children trapped in the same kinds of situations she once endured. She worked with organizations dedicated to fighting trafficking, abuse, and neglect. Her story was no longer a wound, it became her weapon, her strength, her purpose. And she never forgot the night she was saved. Every year, on the anniversary of her rescue, she rode with the bikers across long roads that shimmered beneath the starlight, engines humming like a promise. She rode on the back of Bear's bike the first few times, her hands gripping his jacket as they soared across highways. Later, she rode her own motorcycle, a gift from the group, custom painted with angel wings just like those on her jacket. Wherever she went, she carried the message that even one act of kindness can alter the course of a life. Even a single message sent at 4% battery can summon an army of protectors. Even a girl pushed to the edge of despair can rise again if someone simply chooses to show up. And for her, 60 did. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach others who need hope. Before the ending, please comment one word that describes how this story made you feel. In the end, her life became proof of something powerful. No matter how dark the night, no matter how terrifying the storm, no matter how hopeless the world may seem, there will always be people willing to ride through the rain for someone who needs saving. There will always be hearts ready to fight for kindness. There will always be strangers who can become family. Layla once whispered for help into the darkest night of her life. 60 engines answered, and her world was never the same.